it's this panel of these three exciting uh, digital platforms has been a long time coming, in my imagination at least, for the need for these platforms to talk to each other. And in my mind, there are three things that are fascinating about these three platforms. The first is that they are operating at scale. And that's significant. The second is that they are each working their way to how do we connect the customer to the next point in their journey, whether that be the need for counseling, whether that be the need for a product, whether that need for a service. And they are grappling with the issues of how does this sustain and be financed for the long term. With all the other issues, that these are not platforms that uniquely have an end-to-end digital service to themselves. They are platforms that are integrated within the broader digital space. And that raises another set of issues on privacy, on confidentiality, on data sharing, and the unpredictability of these platforms as well. But at the end of this, when we look at this from the perspective of a journey of a young woman, a young boy, or anyone else who looks for a service or for counseling, one of the biggest challenges I believe the digital architecture faces today is the fragmentation of journeys. And therefore, I think it's really important that this conversation begin here, not because we will have answers today, but because unless we ask the right questions of ourselves, we will not figure out how to get to those answers. And I'm really hoping that these three partners will continue to engage each other post this platform along with other digital platforms, because the future is one in which women will seek the digital, and we will be held accountable of whether we have responded in ways that truly serve the needs of women and other clients. So with that introduction, I'm going to invite Sonia to be the first presenter, and then Ben Bellows, very brief introductions. If that is not satisfactory, you can each introduce yourselves further. I've known Ben for a long time, from his days at the Pop Council. When I heard that he'd started NIVI, I said, this guy who has survived on donor money his entire life doing research now decides to run a business, a social business. Good luck. And here he is today. And if there's one person in our field and community today asking the tough questions around the business model, it's Ben. So Ben, thanks a lot for agreeing to be on this panel. Women First Digital is, I call it the feminist face of DKT. And I hope my colleagues will agree with that. It's bold, it's ambitious, it's doing things that it believes are the ways best to reach women and serve them. And Sonia represents, in her own journey, in her life and career, a person who's worked for these issues, a person who cares very deeply about these issues. So I'm excited with this panel being one where this is not another thing that we do. This is what these guys live and breathe because they believe in it. So I'm going to invite Sonia to be the first speaker, and then Ben. What we'll do after Sonia speaks is have some audience interaction, and then hand it over to Ben, and then come back to a larger discussion.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. It's not showing. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone, for being here. So I'm going to present today on the work of Women First Digital. So digital solutions have opened new frontiers to self-care education and management. Abortion and contraceptive self-care require new approaches to information sharing, user access to providers, direct user support, healthcare provider training, and these can all be facilitated through the use of digital technology and solutions. So Women First Digital is an e-health social enterprise, and what we do is we employ digital solutions to improve global access, safety, anonymity to people seeking abortion care and contraceptive services. And we do this through our 3 digital brands and websites. And each brand offers a different type of service based on the unique needs of the users. So we have safetochoose.org, howtouseabortionpill.org, and findmymethod.org, and I'll just briefly take us through each one of these. So through a person-centered and on-demand counseling and referral model, Safe to Choose provides support on the various abortion methods, including post-abortion care. Counseling services are facilitated via email and a live chat facility directly on the website. Our counselors provide multilingual, locally relevant, culturally sensitive, and around-the-clock support. And on average, our counselors answer about 4,000 requests a month. What's really important to highlight here is that our counseling service is a bespoke service that can be embedded onto other partner websites who may want to offer visitors to their site, fully integrated counseling and referral service. So on average, 50% of users require a referral to an on-the-ground provider. And this could be to access an abortion service, to buy the abortion pills, and also just to have a local resource on hand. And so Safe to Choose developed a global network of safe abortion providers. These are verified providers, and we work with various organizations to onboard these providers. And these are hosted in a secure and encrypted database. And a cool feature of this is a geolocation feature that allows us to map out these providers so that every time we need to make a referral, we know that we're sending the client to their closest point of care each time. Okay. Howtouseabortionpill.org shares facts and resources about the abortion pill. So what to consider before, during, and after, where to buy the pills, how to safely use them, what to do in the case of an emergency, and we do all this in 27 languages. How to Use Abortion Pill designed an AI-powered chatbot called Ali, and Ali provides information on the abortion pills via WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and is also available on the website. And the great thing about Ali is that you can quickly get the information that you need right at your fingertips. And since Ali's launch in 2020, she has hosted over 150,000 conversations and is available in 5 languages. This year, How to Use launched an e-learning course around medical abortion that we developed in partnership with IPPF and was also recently endorsed by FIGO. The course equips providers to be able to support people seeking abortion, medical abortion care up to 13 weeks. And a critical piece of the course is really focused on training providers or centering providers within the self-care space. How can providers be allies of self-care support? How can they facilitate that broader shift towards self-managed medical abortion? So to date, we've certified over 9,000 providers globally. So findmymethod.org is our contraception, sexual health website. And Find My Method provides customized, accurate, and simple to understand information on 18 different contraceptive methods in about 15 different languages. And a cool feature that we are, still building out is a contraceptive service directory. But it's not just focused on contraception. Like, let's say you want an IUD or an ECP and you want to know the closest point of sale to you or point of care, then the database will be able to provide that information to you. But let's say you also want to know where to buy sex toys. We're hoping that we can have this very comprehensive contraception and sexual health and pleasure directory. All right. So I just want to talk a bit about our approach, and we sort of have 6, I guess, pillars. But what I wanted to say just before that is WFD's approach is sort of centered around accommodating each client's desired level of self-care support, from complete anonymity, which we have through our howtouseabortionpill.org site, and more reinforced support, which we see with Safe to Choose, with the counseling and the referral services. So I'm just going to talk us through these 6 sort of pillars. So when I talk about process engineering, what I mean is that all our products are open source and interoperable. And I think this is really important for us because we want to make sure that we can integrate within the activities of other SRH stakeholders that are working in this space to strengthen the overall value chain. And we also want to make sure that the process of integrating our digital technology is very simple, very explicit, and very sort of comprehensible. So centralized data tracking. So we track all our data internally through our various monitoring and analytical tools. And we're able to observe various trends around digital access, demographic trends, and also some of the key, like what are the context-specific behavioral drivers, right? So I think that's something that we're able to do also in real time. When we talk about a systems perspective, so what we do as a digital platform is we provide a supportive framework. And that supportive framework strengthens linkages between the consumer, the end user, the client, and various suppliers of services and products within SRH. And this way, we're able to establish this collaborative ecosystem that ensures quality of care, but also continuity of care. Client-centric, of course, across all our products and resources, we want to ensure consistency, personalization, user-friendliness, and stigma-free care and support. Continuum of care is also important because we collaborate with various SRH providers, and we want to ensure that the design in terms of making those linkages to providers is as seamless and uninterrupted as possible. And it's also an opportunity for us to be able to assess the viability of online and offline linkages and sort of how can we track that better just as stakeholders to better understand the user journey. And value co-creation, I think this is really important. When we look at digital solutions, we know that they're able to sort of serve as this enabling, facilitating service that can integrate different stakeholders, different data, different processes, and self-care models in that sense can then help create sort of value for the end user, because sometimes you may have breakpoints that exist in data, but also in processes, and these can restrict sort of the value that's created and passed on to the end user. And I think it's really important for us as SRH stakeholders in the community to come together and efficiently coordinate and try to integrate as much as possible with each other to strengthen these value chain links and I guess realize the double benefit of both the sort of the social value and also the marketing value, I guess. Finally, I just wanted to share some of our lifetime impact data. So to date, we've hosted 20 million website visits from across 180 countries. We've supported 110,000 counseling sessions via email and live chat. Again, all this is global. 30,000 referrals to on-ground points of care. These are like your providers, pharmacists, sort of any sort of support networks on the ground. 100,000 automated conversations. This is via our chatbot, Ali, that I talked about. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Love to have a round of questions. Sure. No, it's okay. No. Yeah. So questions and or any responses, any perspective that you want to share as you think of this platform and presentation that you just heard. You need more facts, more information. Anyone? Sure, go ahead.
So my question is, are you also this is digital platform for information sharing and counseling? Is it also linked, or do you have plans to link it to e-commerce platform also, so that products can be
Let me come up here.
Yeah.
ordered and all of that?
Yeah, so I think we're always looking for opportunities on how to connect the end user to services and products and make that journey as seamless as possible. So right now, we're mainly referring to on-the-ground providers, hotlines, but I think what we want to do is also start to refer to other digital platforms that are selling these products and probably delivering them directly to the end user. Yeah, so that's something we want to look into as well.
Any other questions? Sure, go ahead. Can we just introduce ourselves before we speak? Sorry, I should ask everyone to do that.
No worries. I'm Swati from Media. We are a Dutch-based organization working on advanced digital rights. And of course, I've been in the work of my first digital sales, and we've been in touch on various different topics. But I was wondering if you'd like to talk a bit more about the challenges you face in the digital sphere, especially related to misinformation around abortion, but also censorship that you might face in the online space.
Sure. Thanks for that question. Yeah, there are a lot of challenges. Of course, the big one that you mentioned is censorship by big technology companies like Meta that operates Facebook and Instagram, also Twitter, also TikTok, because that's how we primarily get our message across. That's how we promote and position our websites as these reliable resources. I mean, even Google, because that is how we rank our websites. That is how we ensure that if someone in Kenya is looking for abortion pills, that a reliable website is ranked higher than one that is providing misinformation, for example. And we're not sure exactly if these big tech companies are just sexist or anti-choice, or if they just have very inscrutable algorithmic processes that they themselves do not understand, or if it's an issue with their content moderation policies, because behind each blocked post or banned account, there was a Facebook employee, for example, that made that decision. But sometimes that decision or the policies they use to make these decisions are not consistently applied, and their policies themselves are quite vague. So you yourself, as the I guess the business in this space, it's very difficult for you to even try to identify a pattern, like what should I and shouldn't I do? Because one day a specific post, let's say about the abortion pills, will be allowed, and then the next day it won't, and there's no explanation why. So that is one of the biggest challenges. I guess another challenge, if we have some time, Lester, another challenge is around the data that we're able to track, especially when it comes to what donors are interested in knowing. Because we operate in the digital space, what's really attractive for clients to come online and seek this information and these services is that it provides a very autonomous, private, and confidential service. And because of that, we intentionally do not track identifying information about the client. But that's something that donors are always asking us to provide, and I get it. They want to know more, like what is the exact profile of this person and why are they coming to your website? So it's a difficult thing to balance because we want to stay true to our values, but we also understand the need for this type of data.
Thanks. We'll move on to Ben, and we can come back to other these conversations again.
Yeah, great.
Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Lester, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to walk us through an overview of NIVI. NIVI is a consumer-facing digital health marketplace, so it's predicated on conversation, driving the exchange in the marketplace, and we'll essentially leverage a bit of data, behavioral science, nudges, and insights to help individuals ultimately take charge of their own health. If I were to advance the slides, would they advance on the screen? There we go. All right, so there's the title slide, and the premise we started NIVI from is that the world is not perfect. And there are, in fact, many challenges ahead of us and in the health system. Consumers are stymied, we posited, in many of these markets, with an inability to move forward on their own health goals. They don't know where to go necessarily or what to do. And then the health system. We identified 4 clusters of actors in the health system. We could think of them as health educators. They might be NGOs, but it could also be the Office of Health Promotion in the ministry. It could be a private sector entity that's in the business of raising awareness. These health promoters are not effectively or efficiently able to communicate or connect to consumers. Likewise, service vendors and product providers are interested in sales, if they're private sector, or increased volume to meet their public sector mission. And they likewise face challenges in connecting to consumers. An often underappreciated but certainly financially important sector of the health system are the financiers, the insurance funds, private or social protection, let's say social insurance funds, the parastatal sector, also are looking to expand number of policyholders, as well as better serve their existing body of households covered. And lastly, but not least, the manufacturers and others in the supply chain of health systems are looking for more heads up, not just behaviors within retail settings or within public sector where they're able to see how many sales have happened here, who's coming in to buy or take up our service or product, but antecedent to that. Prior to coming into the clinic, to the hospital, to the pharmacy, what are consumers' levels of, what are their levels, their intents? What's their motivation? What's driving consumer behaviors and consumer attitudes to certain therapeutic areas or products? They're looking for insights as well. So these 4 clusters in the health system, if you will, are finding as well that the world is not perfect. So in this space, NIVI inserts itself, seeing an opportunity to create value around health awareness, around the promotion and completion of that uptake or continuation, adherence to products and services. And then from the byproduct of our interaction, creating derivative data insights from the nature of our interaction, creating insights into consumer demand, behavior, the knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors that we see from traditional public health CAP studies, being able to take that approach, that lens, and retail it so as to generate more traction in the marketplace and ultimately the sustainability of our business. So what does NIVI look like from a business perspective? To Lester's earlier question, not only how do we drive scale, but how do we sustain the scale once we've driven to that point? The journey begins, as it always does, with the first step. And that first step is our awareness raising campaign. So we ourselves do a fair amount of marketing. We might do that online with Google or Facebook, despite the censors that we encounter in that setting, and we certainly see our own share of ads censored. We might do this in an offline setting with our partners. So we are fundamentally a marketplace built on partnership, built on working with, I hope, more of you going forward and others here at the conference in advancing your public health goals using our underlying technology. So we have partners carrying out and conducting campaigns to raise awareness that NIVI and the chatbot is available as a resource to their segments of interest and bringing them onto the bot. So those campaigns are all convey a call to action, and nested within those calls are keywords or attributable links that allow us to say campaign A was effective in 10xing the number of users brought in versus campaign B. And so we're able to improve that attribution, that onboarding over time. They come in through keywords. We then give them maybe a customized experience. Welcome because you came in through the White Ribbon Alliance. Welcome because you're here due to PSI. And they're then presented options. It's always about informed choice, thinking about a rights-based approach to family planning. It's the user, the consumer, the individual driving forward on their own health objectives, and they themselves choose where they go in the chatbot. So they'll get into this customized experience. They'll have these conversations, or essentially deepening or activating that curiosity on their part, helping them maybe make conscious for the first time an intent that they have in seeking care. And then they essentially are on these journeys. They themselves and we see over time that this person wasn't just curious, casually curious, but they had a deepening awareness to develop, say, insight into which contraceptive methods they ought to consider taking up, and ultimately being able to connect and serve that interest by delivering actionable referrals. So they could go to e-commerce settings. They could go to, in the case of Kenya, Kasha, MyDawa. In the case of Nigeria, looking at Jumia for online e-commerce, or Procto in India, and being able to support essentially a series of options. When consumers are looking for, say, a contraceptive methods, we'll recommend three methods, three nearby physical providers. We geolocate the users and the providers, and then as well providing e-commerce options and booking sites where they can book services, and then drilling down in some cases on specific promotions. So if we're working with MyDawa, thinking of World AIDS Day coming up, we might want to highlight the availability of HIV self-test kits at certain pharmacies, and allowing us to drill down with our users on that topic to explore it more deeply, and then retaining them over time on that journey with follow-up nudges, reminders, and encouragement to take up care and adhere to a particular line or therapeutic area. But how do we make this sustainable? I keep getting back to business models. I started in a room just like this, maybe next door on Sunday, talking about business models. We do this through stacking what can sometimes be fairly shallow margins in this sector, in the markets in which we're working. And we find ways of generating value for our community of nonprofits working in the development sector with subscriptions to the platform. We'll then work in the commercial sector, adding a layer of performance-based referral, and that could be to pharmacies, it could be to clinics, it could be to hospitals. And we find what motivates them. If it's a maternity hospital, really trying to emphasize the A&C journey and bringing in users on that on a commission basis, or with pharmacies, perhaps doing a month-to-month subscription to essentially list them on our platform. Last but not least, of course, the manufacturing insights. We now have an active contract with one pharmaceutical for a particular therapeutic area, and we're looking to actively develop these insights subscriptions across the manufacturing sector. Those stack. We're doing a lot with NIVI Impact, our NGO space. That's where we started with our first contract. It was PSI and IPL in May of 2020. I remember that very fondly, getting that first subscription contract. But we've been building it out since. We've now brought in a number of individual or independent hospitals and clinics under the NIVI Performance product, if you will, and looking to drive uptake on that. Of course, our e-commerce partners, several of them are also performance-based contracts. And then our insights, we just, as I mentioned, got our first manufacturing one. All of that ladders up, allowing us to take what could, on their own, be fairly challenging revenue models and make a going concern out of them combined. The result here is we're able to generate or build off that business model from a growing user base of well over 1.5 million users. These numbers have been updated a little bit. These are active users in our 3 markets, and looking at the number of recommendations in that population served. So we're getting, and we continue to build value with these customers because of what we're doing here with our consumers. What does that mean operationally in these countries? Of course, we've got coverage in all 3 national markets, a heavy concentration in northern India with the Hindi-speaking experience that we have currently on the chatbot. We'll be adding Assamese for some work in the Northeast, but also looking for more regional penetration across India with the addition of new languages in 2023. Kenya, largely concentrated where the populations are along the Rift Valley and the lake. And then in Nigeria, this is a function really of our early partnerships in Lagos and Kaduna, but expecting to see the concentrations expand into other states with new partnerships. So our fundamental model here, that B to B to C, is something I hope you are picking up on here and have heard throughout the conference. It's an ability to serve consumers by serving businesses, serving consumers. We've done over 3 million conversations, 11 health journeys. So yes, SRH, family planning, medication abortion in India, and soon in Kenya, but also into primary healthcare topics, right? So we need to be able to drive revenue beyond to be sustainable. We've got over 14,000 service providers on the platform, and we've estimated 7.6 million data points from that, which again drive these partnerships. So I've got my own discussion questions here that I thought might be interesting at some point if we wanted to dive into it. I was framing this more from NGOs here at the conference, thinking about the PSIs, the Mari Stopes, and the others of the world, whether you want to build or buy internally, and I think to the donors as well. Do the donors want to fund more new chatbots, or should they be thinking about buying into existing solutions that you're hearing today? This is a big and I think a critical question for our community. Stop building new ones and buy into existing ones, if I can say so. But certainly do that from a question of humility and a question of really what are your priorities? You're looking to generate awareness, referrals, or insights. Ultimately, what does it cost? But think of it from an output-based pricing basis. Stop thinking about it from an input-based costing and think about it, what does it cost to achieve a particular outcome, given our objectives? And then, of course, what are your baseline needs and what do you expect to do with the project, with your own money? Is this something that's going to live and die with that grant, or something do you want to sustain beyond? Because solutions you've heard today are certainly multi-generational when it comes to grants. Grants come and go, but our projects, our platforms remain. So I'll leave it there. I heard a bell ring a few minutes ago, so maybe we're over time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We'll open up for questions, clarification questions first, and then we'll try and open up a broader discussion with the audience and the two speakers. I know Tisha is also here, and if you want to speak anytime, feel free to speak, Tisha. But questions for Ben first.
Well, that was good. I did my job. All right.
Yeah, just wondering how hard to punch the questions. Okay, go please.
I was curious how much like return. I was curious how much returning behavior you're seeing in here. People come back and get into conversations, and then buy a product. People buy a product, and then ask questions. People buy products again and again.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. How many people come back to the chatbot? It's been an evolving figure. I'll be very frank, early on, a lot of it was just initial curiosity. People came in, didn't come back. The wonderful thing about what we've had and what we're doing now is, in fact, we do these, we call them REMs, maybe harkening back to the fact I'm a child of the 80s. But the re-engagement messaging, REM, is a strategy we deploy internally to routinely check in. So we know users came in from certain geographies, certain days of the week, times of the year, or times of day even, really. And we can re-engage to pique their interest and see if maybe they came in for family planning or maybe they came in for HIV testing last month. Well, let's check back. Is there another service that we could add on top of that, or that they'd be interested in now, or we could suggest new promotions? So it's not only seeing who comes back, it's how often can we re-engage? What sort of response rates do we get when we deliver a re-engagement campaign? And with those sorts of user-based numbers that we have, the re-engagement becomes more and more a strategy that we look to leverage. So I'm not giving away anything here by citing specific figures, but it's gotten better over time. Return visitors, and then this re-engagement gives us more flexibility. That's a good question.
Go ahead and then next.
I suppose this is probably a question that both of
Sure.
to hear what both of you would say to it. But in AI, especially in the sexual and reproductive health rights space, I was recently at the Web Summit, and something that was being pitched there was another chatbot. I'll just be really out. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, recently I was at the Web Summit, and the one product that seemed to be touted at all that was vaguely connected to sexual and reproductive health rights regarding AI was another chatbot, and it was about domestic violence, and it was
Yeah.
the bot was called Severe, randomly, I'm from Severe, that's why I remember it. And
Mike.
And, oh, great. And I'm just really interested to hear, this is seems a time for chatbots, and a lot of people are developing them, and like you've said, some people should be buying them as opposed to making their own. In terms of AI usage in this space, post-chatbot, what do you think is going to come next that you're being mindful of?
Crystal ball moment, go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting question because we're always trying to understand what will the future digital entry points look like for consumers. I mean, we already have a whole generation that's growing up just very connected to digital, being digital natives. And with artificial intelligence, so right now within our counseling and referral service, which happens primarily online on our live chat facility, we are still looking at ways, because right now we have counselors, right? It's because we know that some users want to interact directly with a counselor and to have that support and that one-on-one sort of accompaniment. But that's not sustainable, you know. Keep expanding your counselors or, you know, increasing that sort of one-on-one personalization. What we need to do is we need to develop an AI-powered chat that can go through these initial screening processes so that the counselors don't have to. And maybe even go beyond that and see if there's a way AI can provide that personalization and that customization for that reinforced support. Because I mean, I think we've all experienced it where we've called airlines and you know when you're talking to a robot. But that's still the future. Nobody's making those robots go away and replacing them with people. But maybe there's a way to make those robots less robotic.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions, observations? Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask Ben, what is Navy's 3-year or 5-year goal, what you're trying to achieve overall? Where you would like to be in 3 years?
Maybe sound more human, take the robot out of it. So the robots that the airlines deploy are there because the airlines are making money. I think we sometimes get caught up in the experience of being a consumer and forgetting that that consumer experience is supported by some sort of commercial enterprise. Where I'd like Nivy to be is a more effective partner to more stakeholders, if you will, across the health sector. I'd like us to be a solution for a significant fraction of the stakeholders in public and private in the markets we're working 3 to 5 years from now. I don't want us to be only in Kenya, India, Nigeria. I'd like us to be in adjacent spaces. I'd like us to be active. I admire the work of Women First Digital. You've got incredible reach, and that's something that we aspire to. That sort of presence and relevance. I think it's relevance. I think of it as relevance to what consumers need on the one hand, and the enterprises, the organizations, and the state agencies that are relevant to the populations they serve. So we want to be part of that.
Can I say something quickly? So, I mean, it builds off a bit of your question, but what we're seeing now is that digital solutions and technologies have gone mainstream, okay? But, you know, every organization is attempting to roll out some type of digital approach. And these approaches are often done in silos without wider linkages to the broader, even just the digital ecosystem or the or trying to connect the digital and the offline spaces. And the problem with this, again, is that a lot of this, I feel, has been driven by donors, just funding all this, and them not looking at the wider ecosystem, even though it is a buzzword that they love using. So I think it'll be important for us, existing digital technology organizations, to see how we can create solutions that can somehow try to integrate all of these other digital, I guess, little digital solution pop-ups that are happening. Because I don't know if they're going to go away, but if we can somehow be that connection that brings the digital ecosystem together, that also brings or strengthens the connections to the offline spaces, and sort of serve as this central repository or control tower. That could be one way to look at it. That could be something that donors might be interested in investing in, rather than investing in individual siloed approaches, is looking at digital as an ecosystem and how to bring everything under sort of one roof.
If anybody here at the conference is using Grab, the super app and the super app play, I think a lot of us aspire to that sort of, being relevant across multiple verticals.
Exactly.
Any other questions, comments? So I have a question for both of you, right? Sorry, somebody out there? Yeah. Have they joined us? Online? Okay, okay. Thank you, sorry. So, our field kind of is not just about the delivery of information, products, and services, right? We think of reproductive health as one of the mechanisms by which we are realizing rights for women, for people, for communities, for all of them, right? And the digital is not without scrutiny by the state and by actors who own a large part of the infrastructure of the digital. Are you concerned that the very space of rights itself is getting constrained for reproductive health as it moves into the digital, because it is far more constrained than the analog world? I mean, if the visibility of a poster in a clinic is rare for the state, right? But a poster on WhatsApp gets attention, right? And I'm just thinking, it may not be true for every country, every context, every place, right? But so much of what women achieved was both by having a strategy of knowing how to navigate through silence and how to navigate through their voices when needed, right? And the digital makes all of that open, because by its nature, it's meant to be that way, right? So how do you see yourselves in the right space in the digital?
I mean, just to clarify, are you saying that within the digital space, women, for example, are not able to access information more privately?
No, I'm not talking about the rights to privacy. I'm talking about the end goal of sexual and reproductive health programs being implemented. Is not just the fact that there's some disease prevention happening or some pregnancy prevention happening or safe abortion happening, right? The experience of being able to claim control over one's body is the experience of being able to claim rights.
Yes.
The digital, I'm arguing, lends itself in a particular way of scrutiny to a set of actors that we are not familiar with and don't have the means or the wherewithal to hold accountable themselves. But with the state, we still have the right to hold it accountable. And you are dependent on an architecture that is not owned by the state, regulated by the state, but controlled by private entities, right? So when violations do happen, who do you hold accountable, right? In any rights-based framing of the issue, you have to say, who is at the end game held accountable if the rights are violated, right? Is it Ben and his outfit? Is it the people who gave you the license, right? Where do we hold accountability in this architecture?
Okay, so digital solutions are not without their risks. Of course, you have issues of cyber attacks and breaches and data security and how to ensure that, and also misinformation. You know, you can see digital as the perfect space to scale and share information at scale. But that doesn't always mean the right kind of information is being shared. Misinformation can go just as viral as the right information. And that's why for me, I personally believe that even when it comes to donors and them wanting to invest in the digital space, being able to just invest in tackling that online misinformation for me is an important investment in and of itself. Because when you look at the other side, let's say the anti-choicers, they're not thinking about sustainability. They're just putting out disinformation all the time and putting out as much as they can. And so if you're someone seeking information online because you want that private experience, you have no way of being able to filter and sort out what is accurate and what is inaccurate. And that can obviously have serious health issues if you end up on a site that is providing inaccurate information, if you come across any anti-choice posts that are talking about abortion reversal or, you know, something insane like that. Yeah, no, they're real.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ben, your thoughts?
I don't have a ready answer. I do think that there's value in designing from the ground up from cognizant of rights, which is why on our conference event that we did Sunday, there was this panel. It's digital. They didn't want to talk about it.
Sorry, guys.
No, it's all right. No, I think that these programs ought to be designed more with rights in mind from the get-go. I'm not saying that in these environments, in the settings in which we are now, certainly are there rights infringements, abuses taking place on a very regular basis. We discussed them here at the conference. Programs ought to have more of a consumer-based, an individual focus, and a rights lens in their design and implementation. How we get there, I'm not quite sure. Empowering informed choice, building in feedback so that users can articulate when there are rights infringements, when they can indicate that they have been properly informed, if you will, if they feel that there's been a breach of confidentiality. Digital is not something different so much as just a tool to augment the reality that we all live every day. It can be both good or bad. In fact, it's often both at the same time,
Oh, okay.
like now.
Sorry, Ben.
It's all right.
The phone crisis.
Just trying to collect my thoughts, and I'm getting distracted myself. It's a good question, Lester. I don't really have a good answer for it. I do know that you know what I found useful? We were looking at performance-based finance programs prior to NIVI, my other life at Pop Council. And we were going through these PBF manuals, if you're familiar with the way PBF works. And we essentially did an orthogonal, we compared these PBF programs with
Acronym PPF.
sorry, performance-based financing. So we were looking at performance-based financing programs, which are directing incentives and delivery of specific services in the context of certain health systems. So these performance incentives, right, they could induce the wrong kind of behavior in the health system in the same way that technology can run counter to the outcomes we want as individuals with rights. And so we took the WHO list of rights principles and we essentially started going through and reading these performance-based manuals, the guide to setting up these programs, and saying, are they rights-based? Can you detect in the design of these programs a sincere effort to build with rights in mind, the 9 or 10 rights that the WHO enumerates? And that has stuck with me. We found there were large gaps in the way the programs were being explicitly designed. And I think of that often as we build NIVI. If we were to take those WHO principles and kind of take apart our program, take away the consumer experience, take it away, I mean, take it apart and kind of look at it from the perspective of these principles. Are we adhering to what these principles lay out? And I think that sort of perspective, that ability to deconstruct and reconstruct from the perspective of rights is something that we need to do more systematically in the digital space because they are such powerful tools.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on, I think within the entire SRH ecosystem, I think every stakeholder has an important part to play to ensure the full realization of the rights of the women. So for example, we'll encounter sometimes challenges from certain organizations because we sort of aggregate digital demand. And these are providers who have the services and the products. And we want to create that linkage to connect the end user to their services and their products, but then they don't want to share that information with us. Maybe they have competing interests, or maybe they want to set up their own online service. And ultimately, who suffers is it's the end user, because they're not being able to have that seamless journey from where they have this intent to have an abortion all the way to actually getting the service. And I think that's also a detriment to achieving their full rights.
Anyone else? Any comments or questions? I have my last question to both of you, right? But before I ask that, anyone else wants to? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I had a few thoughts on what you asked, which is a really relevant question, and we addressed it in a session we had earlier today on looking at online censorship of SRH information on Facebook platform. But we work at the intersection of digital rights, media, and SRHR. And what we claim as digital rights is essentially human rights in the online space, right? So there is a framework that digital rights activists are working with to make sure that these rights are also realized in online spaces. I think what's missing, and what I've been also been a bit critical of within this conference, is this disconnect between movements of digital rights versus SRHR. Like, there needs to be more inter-movement dialogue, because there are people who are working on digital rights and right to privacy, making online spaces safe, but we don't seem to be talking to them, and they don't seem to be talking to us. So I think a lot of that inter-movement dialogue has to happen. And I think as lines blur between online and offline world, even the bigger policy frameworks we have in place will need to take that into account. For instance, we recently were at a learning event, and someone shared that a user on the metaverse shared about being sexually assaulted in the metaverse. But there are no policies in place right now or laws to address that. So I think as more and more people are spending their lives on digital platforms, we will have to evolve that tech and policy framework, and the governments will have to play an important role, including people who are creating these digital media solutions as well. So I think also there's a big need for us as SRHR practitioners to advocate with big tech, but also advocate with governments. And I think that digital rights framework exists, but we need to have more of that space and inter-movement dialogue to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we strategically do not get into advocacy issues, particularly when it comes to lobbying government for policy change or any sort of critical regulatory frameworks, even around how they regulate digital, because right now we're flying under the radar in a lot of countries because we are not physically headquartered anywhere, where in restrictive countries, we are still able to provide access to information and services, like where abortion is restricted, outside the regulatory framework. And I think that's been really important, because people will always ask us, why don't we advocate for change? And there's this gray area where, right now, abortion, let's say, is illegal in a particular country. And by the time it sort of gets to a point where maybe it's decriminalized, people still need access to information, and we need to be able to give it to them. And so that's really the space that we operate in. But so I am a bit concerned, like, if we start to pull in government, does that mean that we are going to be regulated to a point where we can no longer provide and do what we do? There's also that sort of a double-edged sword a bit, I feel. But yeah, I think it's still important. Yeah.
Just to add to what you're saying, the fact when you are global, you need to think about it. You're covering different countries. So are you going to risk information for Uganda just because you want to advocate for the digital rights, or would you prefer just to learn the rules and play for them? Like, I want to keep on providing you information. That's why I'm adjusting to not only Meta policies, but also all the Google algorithms that tends to be updating and updating and updating. Like, you need to play like by the rules in order to keep on reaching them with information. Like, I know it's weird. Again, that's why we don't do advocacy. But for us, it's important to learn the rules, because again, like, if Google is big tech, it comes from the United States, so it's probably basing on their current laws. But what happened, like, I wish there was this oasis for like what women on waves used to do, no? They went to international waters in order to do their thing. But in our case, we cannot do that because that doesn't exist. We need to adjust to them. And then, I don't know if that has happened with you, the fact like when you open a Facebook for a business account and you want to create advertisement, you need to prove you belong to a country. Like, I'm from Mexico, I use my Mexican passport, and ideally for them it's like, you can only advertise to Mexico because you are Mexican. And of course, no, because I need to reach Uruguay, Argentina. I cannot do that. So that's why we always need to play within this gray zone in order to keep on reaching people. So of course, I wish we all could do whatever we want, but for now, we need to adjust to that considering we all know that Google covers 96% of the global audience. But yeah, that's all what I wanted to say, sorry.
If I can just quickly respond to that.
Ask some more questions.
No, but I think if I can quickly respond, I didn't mean that we all have to do advocacy, but I think there needs to be sharing of these experiences so that organizations that are doing advocacy can take that into account, while we still keep doing the work that we can use those loopholes. So I think that needs to happen through information sharing and movement building. Yeah.
So
Agreed.
one of the questions I have for both of you, right, and I'm coming back to this, a lot of the focus, I imagine, right, and clients are of a particular generational group, right, who are savvy and want these services, etc., right? And so one part of the question is that having given up on a generation that's not tech savvy, right? And what does it mean to think that an age inclusivity is as important as a gender inclusivity, etc., right? But the more important question that I have for both of you is, when you think of 5 years out from now, right? What do you see as your competition, right? Is it that this has a business model and commercial entities are emerging in the marketplace, and what philanthropic institutions kind of seeded and have begun cannot compete in that space? Because at some point, somebody in this marketplace is going to start realizing, right, that there is a value proposition which is financial, right, but also related to other things that they can control, therefore, in society. And so I'm wondering, if you were to kind of anticipate scenarios, and if you think of that, what would you start doing today, something differently, right, that sets you up to be competitive in a market of the future? And this is something that I felt that civil society partners and NGOs, and I think the partners that we funded, are always living in the now and solving for that, and are not building, as corporates do, for example, scenario planning for saying, like, what are the 3 things that are likely to change? What are the implications for us? How do we prepare for it? We're always fighting after the fact, I feel. I mean, if you think of even now, clinical services, at one point of time, the private sector meant, in family planning meant, non-profit organizations partnering with the private sector, right? We're now seeing flourishing businesses emerge, right, which are fully commercial, right, and they have greater might in the market. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but what would we be doing today to set up not just both of you, but a bunch of young innovators and others who are coming into this field? What do they need? What's your message to donors of how to start thinking of investing for a more resilient, rights-based digital ecosystem for the future?
I'll take that first stab at that. I think there's some business 101 that needs to be done in this space for anyone who wants to get a business started. I've seen a lot of digital health products that had no market fit. There's some fundamental business planning that needs to be done, that ought to be done for anybody who aspires to be relevant. Yes, there's second and third order strategies that should also be done at some point, but fundamentally understand what your revenue model looks like, what your cost structure looks like, and if it's consumer facing, what are your unit costs and your unit revenues? What's the average value of the users you're engaging on platforms like ours? What is every user worth, on average, to your business? And if you can start modeling that out, what's the path to profitability? What's the path to accelerate that profitability? What's the path to dominating your field? Now, that path will have 3 or 4 different scenarios that Lester was alluding to. You're going to have to think through what these look like, but you're building those scenarios on top of a business model. If you haven't got a business model, you've got nothing more than a shiny object that was grant funded and is going to go away the minute that grant's dead. And I've seen this happen. It happened to me. This is why I got so frustrated with what I was doing. We built this shiny tech object. It was great, technically proficient at screening risk in pregnancy. Worked for 2 years. The grant was done. It was done. So from that dissatisfaction, I realized I had to have a better understanding of how do you build a business. And so that business orientation, that business thinking, what is the average revenue per user in a consumer-facing endeavor? What is the average cost per user in a consumer-facing endeavor? And you, by golly, got to get your revenue higher than your cost. And then you can go strategy, you can go strategic on top of that. And there are a number of different ways. So for us, it wasn't just one revenue stream, it's 3 revenue streams I was outlining there. We'll try and think of others as we go forward. And there's different permutations in those 3 clusters. And 3 different, there are multiple ways you can implement those revenue streams. But having some derivative product value, some derivative revenue that you can generate off of what you're doing increases the probability that you'll be alive at 5 years.
Great. Any comments?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to keep these business principles in mind, especially if you want to be sustainable and generate revenue from your digital model or your products or your solutions. But on the other hand, no, I mean, it's just, if we talk about human rights and we're dealing in the SRH space where there's a lot of, inequity, and this is critical healthcare information, to what extent can we create barriers because we now have revenue models that are focused on revenue generation, but then those you inadvertently put up barriers for the consumer to access these information and services. How do you balance that out?
Come up with a model that doesn't limit consumer perception. No, honestly.
No, I know.
I
think they exist, and I think it's just, it's a bit tricky because when you apply typical business principles to sort of this SRH space, you just want to ensure that it's still customer-centric and customer-focused.
You wouldn't do anything different at Women First Digital by now contracting with those 2,000 providers that you have on the ground. You're not going to infringe on anybody's rights by now charging them for a referral fee. And yet you'll, at the same time, when you do start charging, you will now generate revenue that you didn't have before.
I agree.
And that will give you,
And
in
then
fact, more capital to reach out and market even more
sometimes,
people
but
to expand and knock
sometimes-
down barriers.
But sometimes some of those providers do not want to pay you because they'll be
Yeah.
like, well, hang on, you want to send clients to me, you want to create demand for me, you want me to provide them with these services, yet you want me to pay you for that. I think there needs to be
Yeah.
a mind shift throughout the whole value chain. And I think you understand it. It's
Well-
when we have digital solutions, people sort of think of it as like, oh, I can just get a free ride. You'll create demand for me for free. And I get that. And I think even for us, we're like, well, we're doing it for free now, but we don't want to be doing it for free.
RH&K in Kenya, they pay, was it Zavita or Viteza? I'm messing that up. Vizeta. It's an Egyptian company. Does bookings into their systems. They pay $1,000 shillings for every consultation that's made and completed into this RH&K clinic network. They're paying for referrals. And Visita is making money from that. There's no reason why anybody else couldn't do this. In fact, it brings some value out of that. I think 1,000 sounds awfully high. What is it? Love Matters, Inc. They're starved for revenue. They've got 20,000 monthly active users. Why don't you put ad space on that instead of putting it in Facebook's pockets? There's ways in which you can leverage the existing ecosystem, make money, and still deliver value and deliver value to the end users without limiting who you reach and who you serve on the end user side. So, I mean, I hear you, and if there are certain providers that don't want to participate, don't want to pay, maybe you consider
Yeah.
it a cross-subsidy. And Google doesn't charge every last business to be listed on Google.
Yeah. No, I'm not against generating additional revenue sources through various models and market expansion. And I think there's different ways to do it. I think for
Yeah.
us, we're exploring things as sort of subscription models, pay-per-use, demand generation services that we provide for other organizations because of the reach that we have. So I think there's just different ways to do it. And yeah, it's interesting too.
But I agree, you have to design from the ground up with rights in mind. You don't want to
Yeah.
build a business model that infringes on your end users' rights. You don't want to sell,
Yes.
de-anonymized data and just,
Yes, but
wholesale.
any revenue generation model must be addressing an unmet customer need, because sometimes they're just like charging for something that's not even addressing a market need. You don't want to do that. Yeah.
I think we solved it. It's all done.
Okay, guys, I want to thank both of you for a very stimulating conversation. Thank the audience and all those who kind of stayed here for the last session of the day. I think we, as a community, and I'm so glad that you guys came out here and particularly working on, from a rights-based approach, how do we kind of start thinking through, really institutionalizing rights in this space. And so it's been a great dialogue and conversation. And I'm hoping that it doesn't have to wait till the next ICFP, for this to happen. I really believe a community of practice needs to come together pretty periodically and find ways to brainstorm together. This is not about a paper presented in a conference, because these platforms, the three of you together, in my mind, of the platforms that I know of, are far ahead of everyone else who is starting out, right? And recognizing that the word innovation is now synonymous for the digital, right? All of DKT's awards last night were for digital solutions. Not that we just asked for digital solutions, but if you put out an ad, say, submit an innovation in the field of sexual and reproductive health, you're getting a digital solution today, right? So I think it's for that community coming next, the next kind of solutions, right? How do we kind of create a platform for engagement and learning in the ways that had to be done when pharmacy channels were first beginning, right? When Gopi and PSI were doing Sun Pharma and all these clinics, right? Amy Choi and Hopkins created a space to understand, measure, and support these organizations to build the evidence. And I think that supportive architecture that is required for this ecosystem to become resilient just doesn't exist. Each one is figuring out their own way.
Sign me up.
And
I agree.
USAID will publish a manual very soon on the best practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, even a framework just for understanding what are the best impact indicators in the digital space
Exactly.
is missing.
Yeah.
It's not standardized. Even some of the language we use is not standardized. Anyways, okay. Thank you.
But anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I enjoyed myself. I hope the rest of you did. And thank you.
Thank you, Lester.
Thank you, Lester.